very interesting presentation, and let me start with where Ivan ended. Maybe first question it would be, what is socialist realism? Because we saw what Americans are now doing from these spomenics. But when I was in Utah, in Salt Lake City, when you go in the field beneath the Utah Congress, you see the monuments about the first Mormons which came to their new promised land, to the Utah. If you put that spomenics in the Yugoslavia, I'm sure that Americans would say that this is socialist realism from the 40s and 50s. We haven't had such strong social realism. And when we are talking about Gostinčić, with Erwin Dolenz, where we were in Chicago, go to the one of the biggest bridges in Chicago, and there was a monument which was showing how the Americans would like to be friends, the white man and the old Indians. It was some apologize to the old Indians. We saw that monument, but this is Gostinčić style. Of course it is Gostinčić. So it's the same style in America like is with Tito in Yugoslavia. But of course, if the Westerns won't understand what it means in Yugoslavia, then we must ask ourselves, do they know what they wanted these monuments to mean in America? This is one starter. And about the demolishings and destroys of these monuments in the after 19th. Did you maybe sometimes also investigate what it happens with about the demolition from the 1945? For example, in Slovenia, we didn't have problem what to do with Karađorđević spomenics monument because Italians and German occupiers resolved that problem. What about in Serbia and or Croatia happened with these monuments? Were their destiny the same after 45 as it was for those partisans monuments after 90s? And what about this recreations area, which is from my point of view very interesting point for the monuments to survive? If we in every May in Ljubljana we see those thousands and thousands of people going around in the wires around Ljubljana. This is monuments for which the people understand as some kind of recreation area. Of course, some of the monuments were destroyed and demolished in 1990s, but by that time Ljubljana's mayor. But it is still, this area is perceived as a recreation area. Do you have some ideas or some comparisons how many of these recreation areas survived after the 1990s? And Magdalena, those disagreements about Yugoslav historians you mentioned on the textbooks, on the history of Yugoslavia, and those the history of Communist Party of Yugoslavia. Was this disagreements always on the same level, or it was sometimes nation disagreements, sometimes class disagreements? Because in those history of the Communist Party of Yugoslavia, if this could be regarded as a history book. This is for me more propaganda book, because this is just a book about congresses of the Communist Party, and the topics are, and interpretations are put from the official report from the on the congresses from the Communist Party. So these disagreements, tell us a little more about it. Was these disagreements more on the class level, on the nation level, or just on the topic level? Why should the textbooks in Croatia or in Slovenia have so much about medieval Montenegro or Serbian state? Or why should the textbooks in the Serbia have, I don't know, many pages about Matija Gubec and his prize. And that. I had an idea when I was the president of the State Matura Commission for History. Then we received a question from the Slovene policies, some politicians, why didn't we put, that we don't put enough topic, enough interest for the events from 1989 to 1991. So they just wanted, and for me this was a question, the same question as we can saw on the sources of the historical commission or something like that, or our textbooks from the 60s, that history stopped on 1945. So that those, they just want to enclose the history on only a few years. What about, did they even think about it, that those era, the war era, the national liberation era, is just a continuation of some previous era, and that after that the people are still living in this land and they want to live in some other circumstances. So do you see any connections, because you also work on the textbooks in Croatia, about idea of after 1990s that history should stop with our final step? For communists it was national liberation, for some politicians in Croatia and in Slovenia is national state. I think it will be enough for the start. Okay,
I think it should be. I'll start. So socialist realism, yes, it's definitely true that realism is realism and socialist realism is mostly made. If you put up a helmet of the Red Army or a Titoka on top of a realist statue, you have socialist realism. So, I mean, in a way, this is an international neutral style of monuments. If figures you depict are mostly realist and slightly idealized, so that they are mostly just nothing too noticeable, then you can find, of course, such statues all across the earth, not just Europe. In this context, I think it is important to mention that many of these artists that I listed, Augustinčić included, were also active in the interwar period. So they also made quite a lot of monuments to the Karađorđević dynasty, to those rulers, and then some researchers have pointed out in the recent years that many of these sculptors like to recycle the ideas they had. So the pose they made for, I don't know, King Alexander walking or on a horse, then they reused with Tito walking and riding a horse. So there is certainly a continuity between pre-war and and after-war period, and so yes, ideologically they are very different artistic styles, but if you compare them one by one, it is and you cover up the symbols that they carry, then it is pretty similar, because generally up to this modernist period of Yugoslav monuments, they tried to preserve this realistic approach, but that can be really discerned apart from even the monarchic period before the war. So yes, this continues to your second question about the 1945. Yes, for Serbia, I'm not that great of an expert for what exactly was happening there, but based on the articles and from what I read, there were cases that the partisans were responsible in the first days after the liberation, that they destroyed any remains of Karađorđević monuments or anything that reminded of the old pre-war kingdom. So you could say that the same would very likely happen in Slovenia too if the Germans and Italians didn't already take care of it.
It happened, I think, for example, in Kobarit, where it was Dante monument.
Yeah.
So they didn't demolish it, just removed it, not just for because of Dante himself, but because of inscription on the statue. It was Dante on the borders of Italy, committed by God or something like that.
Yeah, of course, that all had to go. For Slovenia, I know only of one such example, so a monument to King Alexander in Sevnica, which was already demolished during the Second World War by the Germans, but then it was stored in some storage, who knows where, and it stayed there up until somewhere around 1950s or 60s when it was melted down because there was a scarcity of metal apparently at the time. So that is, I think, the only example that is documented so far. Yes. Yes, and finally the recreation and memory of national liberation struggle. Yeah, so I think that was the idea of. This is more, I think, of the 60s, 70s, and 80s. So, and I think the main idea was to try to promote the ideas and ideals of the national liberation struggle to the younger generations, which were already both born after the war in that time and did not feel as obliged to think all that much about this heritage and partisan struggle and so on. So this was one of the ways to modernize this idea and try to attract the newer generations closer to this heritage of national liberation struggle by adding this component of tourism, of recreation, and so on. And I think the barbed wire around Ljubljana, pod spominom tovarištva, is also one of such ideas. I think it was started in the 70s and then more or less finished in the 80s.
And it is example which survived.
Yeah.
As a recreation area and also as a memory point.
Yeah. So generally, I think the cases in Croatia, Serbia are not did not survive to this degree. I think this Ljubljana case is something special, and the Serbian such memorial parks are not exactly meant for such kind of recreation anymore. But yes, that was the idea. But difficult to say why exactly Slovenian case survived and Serbian did not. So that would require additional research.
Thank you. Magdalena.
So the history of other nations in textbooks during Yugoslav period, it's difficult to say was it problematic at that time. It was quite clear that it became problematic in the end of 80s, the beginning of 90s, and in new generations of textbooks. So from the beginning of 90s, those parts, those lesson units devoted to the history of other nations disappeared. So it's especially clear in Serbian situation. Dubravka Stojanović researched that they kept the same textbooks. Because in Croatia there were just new textbooks, so it was less visible. But in Serbia they kept the same textbooks, but they removed just those lessons and replaced them by others. In the context of federal Yugoslavia, it was quite natural to have lessons about other nations. Later, after dissolution of Yugoslavia, maybe it was again natural to remove them, but in some cases it was additionally motivated by the political situation, the war going on at that time. Pregled istorije Saveza komunista, it was, as I said, it was a book that was supposed to be a paradigmatic explanation, interpretation of this history. Interesting thing is that, as I said, it was not successful because they was understood as, at least in Croatia, as a book that neglect Croatian part of the history, because it concentrates on the activity of the Tito and the main military commander in it. And there is a discussion, there was a discussion 1963 going on the Croatian Commission for History of Party. And they discussed the comments prepared on the pregled by Institut za historiju radničkog pokreta, and Tuđman, who was the head of the institute. But there were also present some high military officers and they from partisans. So, for example, General Ivan Rukavina, and their comments, their complaints were exactly from the national point of view. So they even complained on the fact that they got the book to comment that it's not on Croatian. It was on Latinic alphabet, but it was pregled istorije, not historije. So they even complain about this fact. So I would not say there was any problem with class relations or whatever. And the question about the recent events included to textbooks, it was obviously the case with national liberation struggle. That was the foundational myth of socialist Yugoslavia. And in Croatia, it's also quite obvious that the Homeland War, so the Domovinski rat, was included in textbooks from the same reason. And I can remember from my own experience that actually there was when you work on textbooks, on real textbooks for schools, so we understood the intention with including Homeland War, that in the mid-90s, that the intention is to include the history up to today. But when we put some text about later events, for some people it became problematic. So maybe we can understand that it was supposed that history stopped at the most important moment of the history. But maybe it's also because of, so it's another political situation. It's the pluralism, so it's always problematic to comment somehow officially on politics of previous governments, let's say.
Thank you. Now the floor is open for the public. Andrzej Wojciechowski.
So thank you very much for excellent presentations. Exactly, I had also in my mind these American monuments, especially from 1950s. I remember the Korean War monument in Washington, which is super realistic and exactly this is awful. And maybe to Ivan's presentation and Aleš's comment, I've found in Ljubljana on one building, which is some secondary school, coat of arms of the kingdom. And exactly, I haven't seen it in Belgrade, never. So I think that it was completely erased from the public space in Belgrade, in Serbia. But interesting is that at least at one place in Ljubljana, there is that coat of arms of the eagle and the Serb-Croatian Slovene symbol. So I will tell you where it is. I found it. And, do you know about it?
Yeah, I think it's opposite the presidential palace.
Yeah, it's close to there. Yeah.
Yes, I was reading about that.
It's very graphically. It's very nice.
I think the story behind it, I read it in a journal for the people who restore such monuments, that it was apparently covered up by Italians in 1941, and then everyone forgot that it was there, and only when the school was remodeled in 2010-15 they found it and removed the plaster, and
so it's nice.
Yes.
Ekonomska šora.
Yeah.
And to Magdalena, if I may, I would like to ask you, I know that there is some volume from 1968 from a conference, triple collaboration, Polish, Czechoslovak and Yugoslav on the resistance movement. And the Czech participants were as I remember, Jaroslav Opat and all those Czech historians from the 1960s generation who exactly were introducing into the Second World War history and the working class movement history some new topics, so which were not in line with that very rigid party official narrative. And the second thing is that there was a Czechoslovak-Yugoslav Commission of Historians, and in National Archive in Prague there is a file, quite big, of materials like a archival or sources collection on the history of the Czechoslovak-Yugoslav relations in the working class movement. So if you know something about that collaboration and how exactly it was possible to connect this Yugoslav narrative with those in Czechoslovakia and even with Poland.
So I have to admit that I do not have any special knowledge about it, because it's after the period that I researched it in details. But I researched some activities from this earlier period and relation of party historians in Yugoslavia toward party historians from socialist countries. So in Eastern Bloc, so they used to have meetings, congresses, conferences, and Yugoslav historians, so party historians, were not invited. But they were interested in what was said there, and they, for example, they host members of Italian delegations, because Italians were present there, on their way to Bucharest. Actually, it was the conference in Bucharest, and they ask them what was said, and there is a report for party authorities. They accused us of being revisionist, of course, and they talk about this, and Polish representatives were trying to arrange with Italians to publish something that was not possible to publish in Poland, in Italy, in their journals, and so on. So they probably in this later period where the relations were better, it was possible to, but it's a very interesting subject to research, I think. And there, generally speaking, there was a quite a good cooperation with historians, those dealing with earlier periods, with older history. So, for example, Jaroslav Šidak was invited and present in Poland on the discussion on the Polish version of Historia, the new Marxistic synthesis of Polish history, as experienced member of Yugoslav Commission for Synthesis.
Thank you. Before posing a question to Dr. Agičić, I would like to reconnect with the problem of relics, mostly unnoticed, but not because they are not visible, but simply because they are not recognized as a relic of the, even of the Yugoslavia before the 6th January coup in monarchy coup in 1929. And I mean, all of you have probably drank, look at him, drank 3 srca Radenska. The 3 srca Radenska are nothing else than SHS. But nobody knows it. No, some of them know. So it's commercialized to your paper now. Very nice paper, thank you very much. 2 questions. In the picture you depicted, what was the role of, how could I call them, outsiders historians? For instance, Vlada Dedijer. He started as a let's say, politically controlled, of course,
kind of party historian.
Yeah, with the Yugoslav Albanian relations, then the history of the origins of the First World War, of the Sarajevo, and so on. But he finally became a biographer of Tito. Was he all the time an Orthodox biographer? He was not. He was not obviously. But what was? Did he get some how would I say, extra Yugoslav legitimation for being not simply not touchable anymore after of course the Ginas case and so on. But in the 80s, in the 90s, when he was a member of the Russell Tribunal, nobody could touch his thesis. He was a very authoritative historian. What was his political background to allow him to act like this? And the second question is, in the 90s, in the period of early transition, both Slovenia and Croatia established with Italy a mixed commission of historians. The Slovenian-Italian commission succeeded after 7 years of even more of work, meetings and thorough work, to bring a final common statement or even document on the bilateral relations. As far as I know, the Croatian-Italian Commission did not succeed in this task, and I don't know even where and when it stopped working. Could you comment or inform us about this? Thank you.
So maybe first about Dedijer. In the decades immediately after the end of the war, we can say that he is a part of party historiography, and his merits are quite obvious with these volumes of Tito's biography. So partly his position in later decades, it's probably so strong because of his earlier merits, let's say. And the other part of answer would be probably the changed situation in the state, generally speaking, because the situation from 1945 to 1990 was not the same all the time, and we can follow the line of liberalization and decline of liberalization, but also in 80s, obviously, the great change with actually the crisis of brotherhood and unity, and the party elites in some, so in Dedier case in Serbia, actually were probably happy with him at that time, even if it's not verbalized so openly, let's say. So probably this is the answer. And the Croatian-Italian Commission, yeah, I think they stopped at the very beginning. I do know that there are no significant results for sure.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, that's all, folks, would have said in some cartoons. So I think our time is gone. I would like to thank all our presenters for the very, very interesting papers, and would like to say hi to our public for listening to us, for being with us, and see you next time. Thank you.